Good morning, everyone. My name is Carolyn Hart Bennett, and I have written 2 books, 3 screenplays, 13 teleplays, and 1 stage play, all based on a story I wrote 20 years ago called 7 Sisters. Today, I'm going to begin an audio book series where I read to you the chapters from my first book, 7 Sisters, The Voyage. Now, this title is backwards to you, but it says 7 Sisters. Now, some of the chapters are a little bit longer than others, and I've divided them into 2 parts, so A and B. So today I'm going to read to you Chapter 1A, and I will also be stopping once in a while to explain things. I hope that's okay. But before I start reading that, I want to read how the inspiration for this book, okay? This is from a diary of a little 14-year-old girl named Mary Fretwell, who immigrated to America on the Amazon immigration ship in 1863. This is what she wrote in her diary. On June 4th, 1863, I bid farewell to my father and brothers and sisters and sailed on the Amazon from the London docks. I felt very sad as we sailed away to see old England fading out of sight, and especially those I loved. I did not know that I should ever see them again. My companions were Ellen Derrick, Ellen Hackman, and Lizzie Cornell. We were in an upper berth, and Lavinia Triplett and her sister and cousin in the lower one. So there were 7 of us, and we all kept together till we got to Utah. They gave us the name of the 7 Sisters while on a journey. So that is the inspiration for the book. And one more little part. This is the preface. 7 Sisters is a depiction of life on the ocean for Mormon immigrants who sailed from Europe to America during the years 1840 to 1890 and is verified by the personal accounts found on the Family History Resource File CD, Mormon Immigration Index, by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, 1999. On the 330 voyages commissioned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints during those years, conditions aboard immigrant ships varied greatly. Some voyages were plagued by poor food, sickness, death, and persecution from the captain and crew, while other voyages went smoothly and seemed almost like pleasure cruises. One of the more colorful voyages was on the Amazon, which sailed June 4th, 1863, carrying 800 Mormons to New York City, including my great-great-grandmother, Eleanor Wise, who came across the ocean by herself at age 23. What made the Amazon voyage so unique was that it had a send-off from Charles Dickens at the London docks, and it landed in New York City a couple of days after the deadliest riot in American history, the draft riots of 1863. Using this voyage as the setting for 7 Sisters, several of the stories and characters were taken from the Amazon voyage itself, while other stories and characters were taken from other ships and my imagination and set on the Amazon. Okay, we're ready. Let's see. This is Chapter 1, 7 Sisters, The Voyage, Chapter 1A. To the docks, Reynolds, a gentleman ordered as he jogged down the front steps of his flat and climbed into the awaiting open carriage. Once seated, he tamped a top hat onto his head and took a deep breath to test the early morning air. It was a bit chilly for the 1st of June, and he was glad to be wearing his woolen waistcoat. Upon his signal, the carriage pulled away. He opened a leather case, took out a notebook and pencil, and turned to a blank page. He wondered if the bumpy ride would make his writing illegible, but after his first sentence, he determined he could write all his thoughts and still read them later. Allow me to introduce myself. I travel for the Great House of Human Interest Brothers. Literally speaking, I am always wandering here and there from my rooms in Covent Garden, seen many things which, because they interest me, I think might interest my readers. These are my brief credentials as the uncommercial traveler. Behold me on a cool morning in early June on my way to that part of London generally known to the initiated as Down by the Docks. This would be an ideal opening paragraph for the monthly serial his editor had commissioned him to write. He continued jotting down his impressions as the carriage moved along. It was a glorious day. He felt prose flowing. When the carriage neared the streets adjacent to the docks, the traffic got more and more congested as wagons and carriages brought immigrants, baggage, and supplies to the area. "Reynolds, pull over and stop here. I'll walk the rest of the way and catch a cab back this afternoon." "Very good, sir." The traveler walked along the crowded streets, noticing the characters, the smells, the shops and businesses, pubs, and commerce of every description. He leaned against a lamp-post to scratch some dandy notes that described the scene before him. Proprietors and storekeepers were trying to lure the public into their establishments, and land sharks tried to separate seagoers from their hard-earned money. Fish stands were receiving their daily shipment of oysters, shellfish, and the catch of the day. The smell of the rotting fish soon told him it was time to move on. Inside the eating establishments, the traveler could see sailors and immigrants partaking of a last home-cooked meal before beginning their voyages. The sailors, hoping for some company before departing, tried to coax the daughters of Britannica, who were wandering through the streets, inside to dine with them. The daughters, too, were looking for comfort with their engaging smiles, full skirts, and yards of crinoline beneath. But they were particular this morning and kept on roving. The immigrants out in the streets searched for extra food to purchase for their journey. One couldn't count on the shipping company to have the best of provisions. The traveler's notes were temporarily interrupted when he heard a loud ruckus in the distance and saw several bystanders drawn to it. He didn't want to miss something that would enhance his essay, so he hurriedly followed them around the corner, only to discover a crowd of cheering people applauding a brawl of shaggy beards, wild hair, tattooed arms, and a rag bin of colorful shirts. There was malice, mud, and madness, along with two women whom the fighting seemed to be about. These two screeched insults at each other as their compatriots held them back. Fortunately for those involved, the brawl only lasted a minute before it was broken up by a marine policeman patrolling the docks. What a unique place for a study of bawdy, vulgar characters, the traveler thought. But he had another destination. Picking up his pace, he walked toward the prominent Shadwell Church, which was handling quite a business of immigrant prayer makers this morning. When he passed the front gate and round the corner, there, gigantic in the basin, loomed his immigrant ship, the Amazon. The majesty of the ship took him by surprise. It was an impressive sight, very impressive. He estimated the full-rigged ship to be over 1,700 tons and over 200 feet in length. On her bow, freshly painted, was a wooden carving of a voluptuous Amazon warrior. Her head, however, was not disfigured as those ancient women were fabled to have been. The traveler chuckled to himself as he praised the artist, a flattering carver who made it his care to carve busts as they ought to be, not as they were. He continued surveying the scene and couldn't write fast enough to keep up with his observations. The two great gangways connecting the Amazon to the wharf, and up and down these gangways, in and out like ants, were the immigrants who were going to sail. Some had cabbages, loaves of bread, cheese and butter, milk, beds, boxes, and bundles. Nearly all of them carried a new tin can for their daily allowance of water. There were many families arriving, but one in particular caught the traveler's eye as it made its way along the wharf and up the gangway. Stretching out for 15 feet was a father, followed by his wife, a few inches shorter than he was, holding their baby, then 7 more children, all stepping down in height. Boom, 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 boom. Holding hands to keep from being lost or stolen, as they had been warned about, until the dawdling 3-year-old brought up the rear. Where did these people come from? Where were they going? The traveler was intrigued to find out. When he walked up the gangway and crossed the threshold, a band on the poop deck struck up Rule Britannia, as though they were playing especially for his entrance, but he knew that they would have no knowledge of his visit. Arriving on deck, he watched the immigrants swarming about. He observed the general appearance of things as if the late Mr. Amazon's funeral had just come home from the cemetery, and the grieving Mrs. Amazon's trustees find everything in great disorder and are looking high and low for the will. But not all were moving about. Those who weren't scurrying here and there were in every corner, kneeling, crouching, or in some other attitude, writing letters, or in diaries or journals. Each seemed to be expressing his or her thoughts about this life-changing event. Louise Walmsley looked up from her writing to dip her quill in a small bottle of ink sitting nearby, and noticed the traveler as he walked by. She fixed on his face. She had seen him before somewhere. Yes, his tintype was in the newspaper, but she couldn't quite remember his name, so she improvised. A newspaper reporter came on board just now. His eyes are on everyone, and he is walking about, writing all the time. Elijah Larkin scratched a letter to his brother. We are fortunate to have the Cardiff Band playing on the poop deck. It is hard to believe that they are all immigrating together. They are well known for their music in Wales. Lavinia Triplett, with a mixture of dread and determination on her face, wrote, The thought of crossing the ocean is very frightening to me, but I have been saving for 8 years to go to America, and all the king's men can't stop me from going. Esther Devereaux coughed softly as she put her secret thoughts into her diary. I have come on board even though I have had an ailing heart many years standing. I want to start my husband and children to America. The traveler thought about the people before him. He had seen immigrant ships before, but these people were strikingly different from all others he had seen. Without realizing it, his thoughts became vocalized. What would a stranger suppose these immigrants to be? Just as he got these words out, he felt a hand rest gently on his shoulder and heard a deep, familiar voice. What indeed? A stranger would be puzzled to guess the right name for these people. Not turning around, the traveler played along. Indeed he would, he said, smiling. The voice continued. If you hadn't known, could you ever have guessed? How could I, replied the traveler. I would say they are the pick and flower of England. So should I, said the voice. How many are there? Inquired the traveler. 800 in round numbers. 800? What? Geese, villain? 800 Mormons, said the voice. Mormons, explained the traveler, as he turned around to discover that the voice came with a body and a head that he recognized. Captain Hudson, good to see you again, he said, grinning broadly, as the men grabbed and shook hands. Charles Dickens, my old friend, you pay me great respect. I am honored you came on board to write a piece for your monthly serial. My editor gave me instructions to do you credit, and I'll try to do just that, assured Dickens. Can you show me around? Surely, let's go below. And with that, Captain Hudson and Mr. Charles Dickens, the traveler, disappeared through the nearest hatchway. Down the wharf and out of traffic's way, Harold Watts had his arms full as he knelt and clasped his 10-year-old twin daughters to his bosom. Finally, he said in a choked whisper, It's so hard to let you go. Please promise that you will mind Susanna and not be any trouble. Can you do that? Fanny wiped her eyes. Yes, she sputtered. But I'm afraid to go on the ocean, Papa. You must be brave. We will all be together next year, I promise. Your brothers and I will work hard to earn our passage money, and I'll be released from my mission president duties by then, so there will be nothing to keep us from coming on the last voyage of next season. But Papa, how will we find Mummy and Edward when we get there? Phoebe asked. Don't worry, they'll find you. Harold kissed and hugged each twin again as Susanna and her two brothers watched. Boys, why don't you take the twins on board and see where they will bunk? Harold's two adolescent sons eagerly took the twins' hands and started up the gangway. Ooh, this ship is big, exclaimed Fanny. Phoebe stopped briefly. "Here, Stephen, I'll carry Lovey," she announced, as she relieved her brother of the white wicker bird cage he was carrying. The little yellow canary inside swung on his perch and chirped a goodbye song as they walked up the gangway. Fanny didn't dare look down into the harbor. She held on to James's hand. "I've never been more than 8 or 10 miles from home, and I've never seen a ship or any kind of water bigger than a brook before," she said. "You'll be all right once you're on board," James assured her. Now Harold and Susanna were by themselves, and Susanna could not contain her emotions any longer. She flung herself into her father's arms and burst into tears. "Oh, Papa, I'm having second thoughts about this. I'm afraid to face the world alone with Phoebe and Fanny, and on foreign soil." He held her tightly, trying to comfort her. "Susanna, the Lord has called us to gather to Zion, and this is the only way we can afford to go. You're almost 19, and have shown that you can take your mother's place while she's been gone." "But, Papa, I doubt I can do this. We don't know anyone on the ship. Who will help us?" "Just have faith and obey the leaders, Susanna. You'll be fine. Now let's go on board and find your brothers and sisters." Captain Hudson commanded 24 sailors of various ages and experience. They generally worked the rigging and sails and situated cargo and baggage. But right now they were sizing up the kind of immigrants they would be dealing with for the next 6 weeks. Alfie was particularly observing the young girls as he worked. He had an eye for the ladies and had been successful with them as well. He was handsome in a roguish sort of way. As he swarmed up the ratlines, he was joined by his shipmates, who were setting the mainsail. "Huntley, you've been across the pond with Mormons before. What are they like?" questioned Alfie. "An agreeable lot," said Huntley, through his thick Irish accent. "Immigrants are the scrapings at the bottom of the barrel," Titus growled scornfully. Then he spit, just missing two women standing below. "If there's anything I hate, it's religious zealots and nippers," said Griswold as he started back down. "Seems we're awash with both on this trip," Jabez chipped in. "I'm to the gunwales with the bickering, stealing, and fighting among the dirty, undisciplined bunch," said Griswold, recalling his voyage with German and Irish immigrants last season. Stepping off the ratlines onto the gunwale, Titus spotted the giggling twins nearby and looked his most menacing, boomed, "These nippers better stay out from under my feet, or I'll throw them overboard some dark night, along with all their piety." He took a sudden jump onto the deck in their direction, and the shocked twins screamed and fled to Susanna's skirt. While she, not knowing exactly what had happened, bustled them away from this dark-eyed and truly frightening man. The rest of the sailors laughed uproariously at this demonstration. Titus was their idol. He dared say or do anything, and they loved it when he did. He was the largest sailor on the ship, standing a head taller than anyone else, and his muscular body was half again as wide. He had swarthy skin and dark circles under his eyes, giving him a terrifying look. Having moved up to the wheelhouse, the sailors leaned on the railing and laughed as they continued to survey the arriving passengers. A few moments later, a family with 3 adolescent daughters arrived on deck, and Titus carried on with his entertainment. "What do we have here? Maybe I'll have to change my mind about Mormons." The others leered at the 3 young girls and gave some low whistles. "Well, look at all the pretty birds," said Alfie, loud enough for them to hear. Griswold joined in the mocking. "Are you all shipping to the Mormon kingdom to become Brigham Young's wives?" Titus gave a guttural laugh. "Why, I'd marry all 3 of you, and I'm not even a Mormon." The boorish crew laughed loudly as the 3 girls, with cheeks flushing, quickly moved to the hatchway and disappeared down the stairs. The sailors were starting to get some disgusted looks from the adults standing within earshot, but the passengers didn't want to provoke any retaliation, so they stifled their responses. Huntley tried to quietly subdue Titus. "Best not let Bramwell hear you say those things. He won't look kindly on your pestering his flock." "What do I care?" sneered Titus. "These birds are looking ripe for plucking." The sailors sniggered knowingly. Huntley persisted. Their leaders keep a sharp eye on him, a good lookout. They post guards every night to keep the girls from coming up on deck to consort with the sailors and to stop the sailors from wandering below. Not liking to be disciplined, Titus challenged Huntley. Here's a wager, matey. I'll have my way with one or more of them before we raise Newfoundland. I'll put my silver on Titus, said Jabez, and the crew agreed with belly laughs. Just as Captain Hudson, who was in charge of his crew, William Bramall was called by church leaders to be the president of the Mormon Company of Immigrants, or Saints, as they referred to them each other. Bramall had been on a 3-year mission to the British Isles and was returning to America. He wasn't a young missionary like so many returning on the Amazon, but he had been called from the pulpit at a general conference session by President Brigham Young himself. He left his wife and family of 6 children in Utah to answer the call to preach the gospel. This wasn't a rare occurrence. Many men were called over the pulpit in the same way. President Bramall didn't have the sole responsibility of leading the company, however. He had 2 counselors to help him manage his flock. President Richard Palmer was also an American returning missionary, and Bramall's other counselor, President Edward L. Sloan, was an English church leader immigrating with his family. Their jobs were to oversee the saints, organize them, and see to all their physical and spiritual needs. With that uppermost in their minds, President Bramall and Sloan were on the bulwark, sizing up the passengers as they boarded the ship. Soon a gangly adolescent with a trumpet slung over one shoulder started up the gangway. "Halt, young man! Before you board the ship, you must pass the test," declared President Sloan. "I have my ticket, sir," Matthew Geddes, second deck, berth 47B, he said, holding it out to him. "No, that's not the test," said President Palmer. "You can't cross the deck until you place a tune on your horn." Matthew was relieved. "That I can do," he said, as he unshouldered his trumpet, put it to his lips, and played a spirited march. Both leaders clapped enthusiastically, as did others standing nearby. "I think we've found our trumpeter," President Palmer remarked to Sloan. "Son, can you sound the call for all to arise each morning?" "I'm positive I can," said Matthew eagerly. President Palmer put his hand on Matthew's shoulder. "This is a big responsibility, son. We also need you to signal for prayers, sacrament meetings, and for all to go to bed at night." "I would be honored, sir." After another pat of congratulations, Matthew ran to his parents. "Father, Mother, I'm going to be the trumpeter." 3 decks below, Captain Hudson showed Charles Dickens the storage area. While Dickens pretended to wipe his nose with a handkerchief, Captain Hudson could see an explanation was needed. "The immigrants have to get used to the smell below deck," he said. "The odor from 800 bodies in close quarters, without many bathing opportunities for the next 6 weeks, will only be multiplied when they are confined below deck during a storm and seasickness takes over." Dickens suddenly comprehended a few of the trials these people would face on their voyage. When the 2 arrived at the storage room, he tried to get his mind off the smell. "And this is where they come for their weekly rations and daily water supply?" he asked as he noted the many boxes and barrels the dockers were bringing in. "Yes, these barrels are filled with such things as salt pork, beans, oatmeal, peas, flour, and of course, fresh water. The immigrants eat very simply." As they left the storage area and made their way to the cooking galley, they found a small room with a 10-foot square stove in the center. The ship's steward fed the fire, while 9 people stood on the other 3 sides, holding their pots and pans with rags or their skirts. As one person left a spot, another took it. "How can 800 immigrants be fed under such circumstances?" said Dickens. Captain Hudson was quick to explain that the Mormon leadership had divided the 800 passengers into 15 groups or wards, each presided over by a president. Each ward had 30 minutes to cook in the galley, he explained. Then the next ward comes in. Dickens was impressed. They moved up the stairway to the second deck, where the berths lined the wall, 3 tall and 3 deep. Down the center of the room were 5 long tables and benches, which were bolted to the floor. Many passengers were getting settled. Their baggage was stowed close to their berths, with their cooking utensils on top of their beds at one end. "These are close quarters," said Dickens, looking around. "Our conditions have improved greatly since the Irish famine ships," said Hudson. "They became known as coffin ships because so many died from sicknesses caused by cramped, filthy conditions." The captain continued with pride, "The Amazon sails for the Black Ball Line and has the reputation of being the luckiest Western ocean packets. Our passengers have been very satisfied." As the two stepped out of the hatchway into the fresh ocean air, Dickens took a deep breath and held it for a few seconds, savoring it thoroughly. Then he took another. Captain Hudson chuckled. "Are you ready to sign on for the voyage, Mr. Dickens?" "I think I'll serve you better by writing about this noble voyage, Captain," said Dickens. "You and your passengers certainly have my respect." Getting back to his notes, Dickens flipped the page over and continued his questions. "Tell me more about these immigrants, Captain. None seem to be ill-tempered. None are the worse for drink. Nobody swears an oath or uses a coarse word. Nobody seems depressed. Nobody weeps." Most of them came yesterday evening," explained Captain Hudson, "from various parts of England in small parties, and have never seen one another before. Yet they had not been on board but a couple of hours until they established their own police, made their own regulations, and set their own watches at all the hatchways. The Amazon was as quiet and orderly as a man of war by 9 o'clock in the evening. They seem to be people of great faith. I'd like to meet their leader," said Dickens, wondering what such a man would be like. Captain Hudson took a look around the deck until he spotted President Bramwell talking to some families. Then, getting his attention, he waved him over. "President Bramwell, may I present Mr. Charles Dickens?" President Bramwell shook his hand warmly. The captain continued, "He is doing a piece for his monthly serial." "Morning Chronicle?" asked Bramwell. "You've read it?" I haven't had the pleasure, sir, but I'm sure I will be more interested in what you have to say after today." "These are very fine immigrants you've gathered together here," Dickens stated. "Yes, sir, they are a fine people," said the president. "Indeed, I think it would be difficult to find 800 people together anywhere else and find so much beauty, strength, and capacity for work among them." "I think so," said Bramwell, enjoying the compliment. "We sent out about 1,000 more yesterday from Liverpool." "You don't say," marveled Dickens. "It's unusual that you're sailing from London, isn't it?" "Ships have been scarce this season," said Bramwell. "We were forced to find a seaworthy ship in London for our immigrants." Further probing, Dickens observed, "These people are all so cheery and make so little of the long distance before them. Well, you see, many of them have friends or family out in Utah, and they look forward to making new friends along the way as well." "Along the way?" "This ship lands them in New York. Then they go on their way by rail just beyond St. Louis to that part of the banks of the Missouri where they strike the plains at Florence, Nebraska. There, wagons from the Salt Lake Valley meet and accompany them on their journey across 1,200 more miles." Dickens was in awe of the immense journey these people were undertaking. They were bound for the Great Salt Lake, nearly halfway around the world. He himself hadn't been much beyond the British Isles yet. That's the end of Chapter 1A. More next time. Over and out.